Hey, what's going on? Today I wanted to talk about the Reason Rack plugin and show you some of the things that it can do. This is what it sounds like. Okay, before I show you how it works, I just wanted to give a brief history of Reason. Back in 1994, the company was called Propellerhead, and they introduced a piece of software called Recycle. And Recycle was essentially like a time stretching tool that allowed you to take audio and then you could put in the different markers for the transients. You could then put that piece of audio into different projects with different BPMs. In 1997, they dropped a product called Rebirth, and Rebirth was essentially like a Roland groove box. It had a TR-808, a TR-909, and then two TB-303s. And you could essentially put patterns together and create songs and export them and produce your own tracks. And I think that that was pretty powerful for 1997. In 1998, Reason collaborated with Steinberg, the folks that made Cubase, who's also responsible for coming up with the format VST, and they created a product called Rewire. And Rewire essentially allowed one audio workstation to speak to another audio workstation's clock, or some music software to another music software's clock. You could sort of think of this like an old school version of Ableton Link. In 2000, they dropped the first instance of Reason, which is pretty much the product that folks are still using today. And it was essentially a virtual analog studio. So you had a mixing board, you had a synthesizer, you had a more like step sequencer drum machine, you had a sampler, you had a Rex loop player that played recycle files. There was a MIDI sequencer device, and then you also had a sequencer, and then all the normal things that you expect like delay and reverb and EQs and all that sort of stuff. In 2009, they introduced a product called Record, which would work in conjunction with Reason, and it allowed you to do things like record audio in, so you could play guitar or you could sing directly into Reason. In 2012, they merged Record and Reason together to create a fully functional standalone DAW. And they also introduced rack extensions, which were third-party developed instruments, effects, and utilities. In 2017, Reason finally began to support VST formats. And to be honest, I think that that was probably a little too late. We could talk about that later. In 2019, they dropped the brand name Propellerhead for Reason Studios. In 2022, Reason opened up support for VST3, as well as the ability to run native on Apple M1, M2 workstations. Okay, I'm gonna show you how the Reason Rack plugin works. Maybe in a future video, I'll focus on the DAW, but for now, I'm just gonna show you how it works with Ableton. We are over in Ableton, and I'm looking at plugins, and under Reason Studios, we have two different options here. We have Reason Rack plugin, and then we have the Reason Rack plugin effect. And the Reason Rack plugin is access to the instruments as well as the effects, and then the effects are just the effects. Let's go ahead and drag over this Reason Rack plugin here. And when you open it up, you're greeted with this first page here, and you have a couple of different instruments that you can pick from. On the left-hand side, we have this option for browser, and then we can go through here and take a look at all of the different instruments that are here. We've got instruments, we have effects, and there's a ton of different effects that are available, utilities, and then Reason's players. One of the most important parts about Reason is its library and its curated sounds. It is so deep, like crazy deep, and it's been built and grown over a period of almost 25 years. So there's just like everything. So we're gonna go to instruments, and I'm gonna bring in Subtractor. Whenever you first open it up, it already has a preset patch here, and it does that for all of the instruments that are there. We'll take a listen real quick. I need to turn this up a little bit. Maybe I'll just thumb through a couple of these so that we can hear it. find another instrument. We'll keep on digging around here. Thor. Ooh. So this was the first drum instrument that Reason originally had. It's sort of like a step sequencer, and you have two different ways that you can use it. So you can just play notes into it. So you could use Ableton sequencer and you could record those in, or you could use it how it's intended. So for instance, if we select the kick here and we just hit this and hit run. Grab this new synth here, Monotone. It's a bass synthesizer. So let me show you another layer here. If we go to effects, we have just a crazy amount of effects, and these are just the built-in Reason effects. These aren't the third-party ones. The echo. Kind of sounds like the Christmas song. Here's something else that's really important when working in Reason is that you have all of the controls that are on the front, but you also have an option to flip the rack. I'm gonna close this down so we can see. If we flip the rack, boom. Now we have access to some extra controls that are on the back of the panel. And I think that this is so damn cool because if you were gonna have outboard gear or you were looking to get outboard gear, but you wanted to understand how all of this functioned, I think that this is a great place to start in the same way that maybe VCV rack is a good way to start before you get into modular. For me, this was the first time that I had ever seen rack equipment. And if you understand how it works here, then you would understand how it works in the real world. Maybe let's add a reverb. So we'll drag this down here. And if you take a look, it's already sort of automatically done the connections for you. Sounds pretty good, right? Here's a sampler. Let's put a sampler in here, which is really cool because if you build some effects or something and you realize that this isn't the instrument that you want, you can then just drag that instrument on top of the other instrument and it will automatically do the routing for you. Let's see what we got here. All right, so I'm gonna build something really quickly. What I'm gonna do is, instead of allowing it to route the audio for me, I'm going to do my own routing. So I'm going to go into utilities, and the first thing that I'm gonna grab is an audio merger and splitter. And then I'm also gonna grab a line mixer, okay? And I'm gonna flip the rack. And what we'll do here is if we take a look at the main output, or this is the main that's gonna go to basically the output on the channel of Ableton, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put this into the master out. And then I'm gonna take the main out from the synth here. Now this gives me an option to route audio in different places. So I'll throw this here and let's go ahead and start adding some effects. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a reverb. And again, I'm gonna hold down Shift and I'm gonna take the audio out from this splitter and I'm gonna put it into the input and then I'm gonna put it into this mixer. We'll flip the mixer. I've turned the volume down on channel 2. If I play this, we're not hearing anything, but then I can turn this up. Cool, right? Add another effect in here. The distortion, same thing. I'm just gonna hold down Shift. We'll flip the rack over and we'll go out of here into the mixer or into the distortion, and then we'll go into channel 3, all right? And then has this thing called players, and they are different things that you can put before the instruments. The best way that you can sort of think of it is like they're MIDI effects. And for this one here, I'm gonna grab, it's gonna be scales and chords, and I'm gonna select this EDM thing here. It's really, really sick because now I'm just using one finger. Oh, sick. Which is really, really cool for somebody like me who's just a drummer and I don't really have a lot of music theory. Let's try one more player. ARP. To be honest with you, I feel like I'm sort of struggling to be able to show you the depth of Reason. Let me show you some wild stuff here real quick. Sampler here, and then we're gonna go to the orchestra sound. That's cool. How about some mallets? This. Let's take a look at some of the rack extensions. One of my favorite rack extensions that I think is so super great is Antidote by Synapse Audio. And I think that they did something else. Now I gotta look this up real quick. Hold up. They got this Hans Zimmer synth, which I think is sick. But anyways, Antidote was the first like synth that I ever played with and started to be able to wrap my head around how synthesis works. And I think this thing just sounds super, super good. Let's thumb through some presets. Now, for instance, if we were to flip the rack over and you take a look, you can see that we've got CV inputs. There's a multitude of different ways that you can control them. I'm gonna just show you a simple way here. We're gonna go to Utilities, and within Utilities, this Pulsar dual LFO. I'm gonna hold down Shift so that it doesn't map anything. We've got two LFOs, and you got a couple different controls like the rate and the depth, and then the wave type. You can change the phase. It looks like it's got a shuffle on there and like a lag. It looks like you can sync the two of these here, which is really, really cool because you can supplement this into any synth or effect. So that sort of makes this thing modular, right? I'm gonna flip it back over again and then let's take a look. So we have LFO1 and we have CV out. So I can take this CV out, CV1. This is sort of silly to do because this particular synth has its own LFOs. So you wouldn't necessarily need this. But that's okay, I'm just gonna show you an example of it. So we'll go back over here, back down, CV, destination, pitch, chorus. You can listen to different wave types. I want to show you one last thing with the Reason rack. You can group all of your effects or racks, everything that you've made into one unit, which is called a combinator. So I'm going to select all these by holding Shift down, and I'm going to right click, and then there's an option in here for combine. And now, if you take a look, they are encompassed in this device here. And if I click on devices, it hides all of them. But all of my stuff is still there, which is really, really cool. And you can sort of think of this as like the macros in an instrument rack or a rack effect that you have within Ableton. If you select editor, you have access to all of the different devices that are in here, right? So here's our synth, automatic, which is this, audiomatic, okay. Here's our chorus, and Over here, you have an option to create a source. So we could say, I want it to be this pitch control, or I want it to be the mod control, or I want it to be one of these knobs, or one of these switches, right? You have all of these different options that you can add. So for instance, let's just go ahead and say antidote, and let's go to control 1. And we want the target for control 1 to be filter, cutoff. And then you can set the amount here. We can take this a step further, our echo. We can go ahead and set this to control 2, the dry wet balance. And let's set the max to 50, right? Because we know that we don't want to go like that high. This is something that I think is so sick. I'm gonna hide all these devices. You have this button here that says configure. And if you select that, it allows you to modify your combinator and the controls that are on here. So right now we have all of these different controls that we see here. I'm gonna get rid of everything else. I don't want any of these things. And when you're in this mode, you can then move these items around, and then you can change the way that they look. So you can put these big fat knobs on them, change the scale and the text color to light, and then I'm gonna change this background to black. And if you double click on these, right, you can name them. I think that this is so sick because you have all these infinite sounds that you could make within Reason, a ton of effects that I haven't even scratched the surface of, and then you can route them in any way that you want, and then you can create your own panel. I thought that this was really sick, these ones that say Nordic, right? And there are these little Nord switches. I don't know why I think that that's so cool. Like a little happy face, like if there was a little face there. If I touch these knobs here, you can see our automation line is moving. Same with delay. Okay, right, so it's not anything like fantastic, but you can build these really deep instruments and effects and different sounds. You can then set up your panel with the controls in the way that you want. And this thing is really, really deep, right? Because you can even put your own backdrop in there. So you can, like, if you're talented like that, then you could set up your own interface. I put my own backdrop in there, and I put my own knobs and my Nord buttons, right? I don't know. I could probably explore this for a really long time, and I still don't think that I would be able to really do it justice or scratch the surface on it. My intention with this is to just sort of get you curious. If you've never used Reason, or if you don't know anything about the Reason Rack, I think that this thing shines so well as a VST plugin. I think that if you are using Ableton stock stuff, which sounds great, and you're looking to expand and you want to add something else, and you're sort of looking at like, oh, maybe I'll go with native instruments or I'll go in this direction, I highly recommend Reason, the Reason Rack plugin. I think that it's great. And then also you get a DAW out of it as well, and there's a different way to explore. There's so much in there, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more, or you think that, you know, if you have any questions or anything, just let me know and I'll explore it deeper. Like I said, maybe I'll go into the DAW and show you how that functions if you're interested. However, I think that it shines much better whenever you are in Ableton. And plus, I love using the push, so it just seems to make sense. Anyways, that's it. Hey, I'll talk to you later. Bye.